Welcome back to F1 Brake Check. Two guys talking about F1, nerding out about the history and technology, and just being silly. We are so happy you decided to ride along as we close out our second season. On today's episode, we're going to recap the 2024 season, the highs, the lows, and the absurd. Corey and I will give our end of season grades, and Corey will melt my brain once again with our Stump the Pundit segment. And we'll also dive into the latest news. So settle back, grab a gin and tonic as we go across the finish line for season 2 of F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
Welcome back to F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your hosts. With me, as always, is my co-host for life, my ride or die, my brother in arms, Corey Broom. Corey, how are you doing this week, sir?
It's going, man. I'm ready for next week. How about you?
Yes, we are getting. Yes, I'm doing about the same. I am hanging on, just counting the days until we have the long holiday week, couple of weeks here in the United States, and for those of you around the world who are also have holidays coming up, you probably know exactly what we're talking about. So yes, I'm just trying to hang on and count the days.
Right on.
So a week without Formula One. So we've kind of started into that long cold winter. It's been a little disconcerting to say the least. But it looks like we do have we definitely have got some news to take and talk about. And, so it has been anything but quiet. So first off, one piece of news that we didn't get to a couple weeks ago that we need to talk about real quick. It turns out the GM has named Graham Loudon as their team principal. He has been he was the sporting director and CEO at Manor F1 in its multiple guises in Formula One. Back a few years ago, when it was known as both Virgin Racing and Marussia. So he's got a tremendous amount of experience in Formula One, and he's really been helping to guide Cadillac, and before that, Andretti Autosport and Andretti, which was later renamed Andretti Global. But he's been really kind of instrumental in help shepherding that forward and getting the final approval from Formula One and the FIA to join Formula One in 2026. So
Awesome.
I think it's a good thing. I think it's he's they've got I think GM is starting to make the right moves. They've got someone who's very experienced in uh in Formula One, in managing, Formula One teams. Now, albeit they were much smaller teams, they were teams that were never really much of a threat as far as, performance and things like that. So, but he's going to have to, so he's really going to have to step up his game under Cadillac. But from what I understand, he's a very sharp guy. He really understands the sport. So I think he's going to be able to put the right people in place to take and try to make Cadillac as successful as possible.
That's fantastic. I'm super excited for 2026 and seeing them on the grid, seeing what they can do.
Yep. And also, we also got the news this last week that Cadillac has reached a deal with Ferrari to provide power units to the cars for the first couple of years until their own power units come online in 2028. So I think this is, originally the rumor had it that they had a handshake deal with Renault to provide power units. And then once Renault decided that after 2025, they're no longer going to produce power units anymore, and they're now going to be a Mercedes customer. There was a lot of there was a lot of speculation about, what this was going to mean for Cadillac. So the fact that Ferrari has, has said that yes, they will provide power units to Cadillac, and that puts Cadillac in a very good position, as we saw this year with Haas being able to take the Ferrari power units and being able to make, considerable, gains under, with their own car with the Ferrari power unit in the back. So, and also a number of other parts that Haas purchases from Ferrari. So I think it's definitely it's already putting Cadillac in a very, very good
Yeah.
position from the very beginning as they find their way in Formula One.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah.
They've made some really good moves, just like you said. So it'll be interesting what they can do from an engineering and a aerodynamic standpoint.
The next big thing on our rundown is to take and talk about postseason testing from Abu Dhabi. So we had a combination of tire testing for Pirelli, as well as a number of young drivers who got, their chance to take out the Formula One cars and do some testing for the teams to kind of, both be evaluated by the teams and also to take and get that Formula One experience. And we also got some of the drivers who are going to be making moves next season, got their first taste of their new machinery. Hulkenberg at Sauber, Ocon at Haas. And then we also got to see, for the first time, we got to see Yuki finally get his chance to take and get behind the wheel of a Red Bull at the senior team.
Yeah.
So lots to unpack here. So, first of all, the biggest surprise for me, and then you can share your biggest surprise, um, was the fact that Carlos Sainz in the Williams was second fastest
Yeah.
overall
Right.
under testing. Now, as we've talked about a number of times before, you can't put a lot of stock into testing times, just simply because you don't know what kind of configuration the cars they were running. Were they running them underweight? Were they running
Mhm.
them, with low fuel loads? Were they running, and also because of being, at the same time, a tire test for Pirelli, what kind of compound they were actually running, because a lot of times they don't even mark. All of the tires are marked regardless of what compound it is. They're all marked the same, so you can't really tell. So there's not, you can put, take all the results with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that, we saw Carlos Sainz get in the car very first time, turned a whole boatload of laps, very clean laps, never had any problems or anything. He ran 146 laps for Williams. So, and he was only, and he was right behind his former teammate, Charles Leclerc, at the top of the time. So I
Yeah.
think this bodes very well and provides a lot of morale boost that's much needed at Williams, for
Right.
the team and everything going into next season.
Yeah. Yeah. It's gonna be interesting to see how he and Alex Albon, how they compare and contrast. It's gonna be very
Hmm.
telling, right, to see how uh where Alex actually places with somebody that is really a top tier driver in sign. So it's going to be interesting what happens next year.
Oh, absolutely. It's good. It's going to be fun to watch. It really is.
Yeah,
I'm just counting the days until
I know.
until preseason testing. It's going to be, like I said, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yep.
So a couple of other surprises. Well, first of all, let's take and talk about the one non-surprise. So, we had Antonelli getting his latest test in the Mercedes AMG, was in the top five for testing. Now, again, like I said, you have to take it with a grain of salt because you don't know exactly, how the car was being run. But the fact that Antonelli went out and he set some really, really fast times, even though he, compared to a lot of the other drivers, only had very limited running, he only ended up turning 62 laps over
Yeah.
over the course of the day. But, I think, we've talked about it before that I think, Antonelli, providing the spotlight isn't too big for him. His talent though is definitely going to go a long way in the car, I think, next year. So I thought it was really interesting that he was right there.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. No doubt. It'll be especially him right next to George. It's going to be George's first true lead role. So it'll be very nice to see what George can help him along with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other things, though, that I thought was really interesting was the fact that Nico Hulkenberg, in his first running in the Sauber, was fourth on the time chart. So that goes to show you right then and there what I was talking about all along is that sometimes you just have to take these uh, testing times with a grain of salt
Yeah.
because we both know just how bad that
Hmm.
Sauber was this year. So it was like for Hulkenberg to be able to take and go out and be able to be that impressive right out of the box, I
Right.
thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So one of the other things though too is that for the first time in Formula One history, we had two brothers driving for the same team at the same test. Now, we've had other instances where we've had brothers driving for different teams, both
Hmm.
racing and at tests, but Charles Leclerc and his younger brother
Okay.
Arthur were both driving for Ferrari during the open test at Abu Dhabi. So that was kind of we got to kind of witness a little bit of history with
Yeah.
that. So I thought that
Yep.
was really cool, and
No, I totally agree.
Arthur yeah, and Arthur turned in some pretty, solid times and everything. He did have somewhat limited running. He only had what I think 66 or 68 laps over the course of his time. But he did turn in some decent lap times. He wasn't far off of his, big brother, but having, this being his first taste of the car, whereas Charles has had a
Yeah.
whole season in the car, it definitely goes to show, just how incredible of a driver that Charles really is.
Right.
And then the final thing that I thought was really kind of interesting is, like we mentioned at the top, is that Yuki finally got his chance to pedal the senior team's car around at Red Bull. And, there's a lot of people that were putting a lot of stock into the fact that Yuki in the Red Bull was slower than his teammate Liam Lawson was in the Racing Bull, which by all accounts is a slower car.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that no, Liam was obviously running a much lighter car. He was probably running more like qualifying laps and things like that. So because the fact of the matter is the fact that Yuki out qualified Liam and outraced him. He out qualified him in every single race that they were teammates this year. And he outraced him in, I think, all but one instance. So I'm not going
Right.
to put a whole lot of stock
Yeah,
into those
totally.
times
Right.
in a comparison between Lawson and Sonoda.
It's fun to watch, but it doesn't really account for much.
Yes. But the biggest thing is, though, is that I thought that it was really good for Yuki, though, in the fact that he was able to run 127 laps. He did them all without incident. He was very solid. You look at his times across the entire run, and his times were consistent all the way around. There wasn't a lot of, dips and he just happened to turn in one really fast lap, and all the rest of them were kind of mediocre. No, he looked very consistent over the entire run. So I think it was definitely a very strong audition for the
Senior seat.
for that seat, which we'll get
Yeah.
into, a little bit with our next news item.
Right. Yeah, he looked good. And I really hope that he gets a fair shake at the senior seat. I really hope that Christian Horner and Helmut Marko actually takes a very serious look at him.
Yes,
All
I agree.
indications seem it's not going to be that way, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, but so let's get into that and unpack all that. So today we're recording this on Wednesday, December the 18th, and we got the news that it is official that Carlos Sainz, our boy Checo, is officially out at Red Bull. Which we kind of knew that the writing was on the wall that this was going to happen. And so first of all, we'll unpack, where everything seemed to go wrong, and then we'll take a look at what's going to be on the horizon for Red Bull. So, the whole thing is this that I'm still just it was as we talked for a number of times through the back half of the season of just how things had gone just so wrong
Yeah.
for Checo.
Oh,
The first few
terrible.
races of the season, he looked really good. I mean, you have to remember that. I mean, this was a guy that was only 6/1000ths of a second off of his teammate Max Verstappen at Suzuka. They Red Bull had a 1-2 in the race at Suzuka. He looked really strong. And then by Miami, up until Miami, he looked really, really good. And then after Miami, everything just seemed to took a complete nosedive.
Yeah.
As we lamented a number of times, the last few races of last season didn't look good for Checo, and he had to kind of struggle in order to stay ahead of Leclerc and come in second place in the drivers championship last year, a distant second to his teammate Verstappen in the much documented all conquering season last year.
Yeah.
And then but he came out of the gate looking really strong, and then after Miami it was just like something happened and he had just completely lost his way. Now, part of that is we have to take and chalk that up to also this Miami was, about the time where the news broke that Adrian Newey was on his way out. And at that point, we saw, him starting to be left out of, more and more of the developmental decisions and him taking more of a step back away from the team and focusing on the RB supercar, hypercar. And, the development of the car kind of seemed to stall and kind of go in the wrong direction for a little bit. We saw even Max start to struggle a little bit,
Yeah.
not nowhere
Not a
near to
little
the
bit.
degree that Checo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was, nowhere to the degree that Checo, fell off, but we still had there was a period there of what 6 or 7 races where Verstappen wasn't even on the podium, let
Yeah.
alone fighting for a win or anything like
Right.
that. Um, so Red Bull kind of found their way from the engineering and technical side. They righted the ship. The late season upgrades seemed to make a huge difference on the car, and Verstappen started looking racy again. But
Yeah.
even at that point, though, I don't know if it was just Checo's confidence in the car was so shaken at that point that even with the car's upgrades, it wasn't enough for him to regain form. And by the end of the season, he looked so woeful that they basically had no choice but to cut him loose.
No way. Yeah. I mean, he was over 300 points down from Verstappen. Just there's no way you can continue. I mean, if I was looking at it, if Checo would have scored an additional 100 points throughout the season, Red Bull would be champions. 100 points. He couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
He's not the driver. If you look at the other driver pairings, they're very close. Within I'd say under 100 points typically. Um,
Oh
with
yeah.
with Red Bull is just striking how different, from a points perspective it is. And I mean, how many times was Checo out in Q1? It
Yes.
just no way that they could continue, that they being Red Bull could continue with Sergio. There was just no way. They had to choose
No,
somebody else or lose another
absolutely. And
constructor
I
like we
even
talked
saw,
about last time.
yeah. Well, it's like I saw a little factoid somewhere that this season Checo had more Q1 exits this season alone than what Verstappen has had in his entire career. That right there to me was just one of the most telling facts about the tale of two completely different seasons for the two different Red Bull drivers.
There's just no way that they can move forward with him.
No, absolutely not. And one other thing too that I thought was really interesting is that in the last 18 races of the season, Checo had a sum total of 49 points, whereas Pierre Gasly finished with 42 points, all of those in the last quarter of the season.
Oh, isn't that nuts?
It is. It's just that to me right there is just absolutely insane. You had a car in the Alpine that was an absolute pig at the beginning of the season, and Pierre Gasly still managed to almost outscore Carlos Sainz for the season.
Right. Yeah, yeah. The only question now is, and like what we've been talking about for the last couple of episodes, is who's going to be replacing him. So
Yes. Well, all indications, I mean, if you believe the rumor mill, which right now I'm not putting a lot of stock into the rumor mill right now, that I think
yeah,
a lot of people just are assuming that Lawson is going to be Checo's replacement. But I thought Chris Medlin, who is a freelance writer but writes primarily for Racer Magazine here in the
mm,
US, but he's their F1 correspondent. He wrote a really great piece today when the news broke, and that all indications looked like Liam Lawson was going to get that
I
second seat. But he made the point that this would be a huge mistake in the part of Red Bull, because and it would be really unfortunate for Red Bull that they haven't learned from the mistakes that they made with Gasly, and that they made with Albon, and that they made with other drivers, when they brought them up too quickly, because Lawson hasn't been in Formula One long enough that I really don't think he's going to he if they bring him up and put him into that second seat, he's going to flame out just as fast, if not faster, than Gasly or Albon did.
Yeah, the other thing that I've been thinking about too is if they promoted Lawson, again, he's a good driver and everything, but the problem that I think that they will face if they bring in Lawson is not only flaming out, but if he doesn't flame out, he's going to be on Max all the time, which that's a kiss of death at Red Bull, at least for right now. It is. It's a kiss
Hmm.
of death. So I would see him more doing things against Verstappen and not being a team player with Verstappen versus anything. Well, maybe flaming out too because he might not be able to handle the pressure. But given his attitude, I think that he would be able to probably be okay with the pressure. It's just my question is how well is he going to play ball with Verstappen and with the team in general? So I just
Yeah.
from what I've seen, I don't see that.
Yeah, but the thing is though is like Medlin wrote, one of the things that he made the very point same point that I've been making, is the fact that Yuki has spent 5 years at Racing Bull, and previously when it was called AlphaTauri, and even before that. Um, but the last 2.5 seasons, maybe you can kind of say maybe three, but at least the last 2.5 seasons, he has outraced, and
Yeah.
he has consistently outraced and outqualified all of his teammates.
Yeah.
He's done it against Lawson, he's done it against Ricardo, who was, Ricardo was the
Yeah.
last driver who was actually able to even challenge Max in the Red Bull.
Yep.
So, because of that, I think that Medlin made the really great point that, even if they promote Yuki and he doesn't work out, they still have Lawson in the wings.
Right.
But if they promote Lawson
Yuki's
and
gone.
Yuki decides, okay, you guys don't, I've done everything that you've asked of me. I have improved myself, and I have improved myself and proven myself time and time again, over the last 2.5 seasons, that I deserve that spot next to Verstappen, that I think that I can be a really good teammate to Verstappen. I can really help the team out. And you still promote Lawson, who's only had a handful of races in F1,
Yeah.
over
I know.
me,
Right.
then I'm going to go try to find a spot in another team. And there's a lot of teams I think that would
Yeah.
be more than willing to take a flyer on Yuki. And so not only would they have the problem of Lawson flaming out, but then they would also lose a really good driver in Yuki. And then, it's like, and so, I mean, yeah, Red Bull's got more drivers in the pipeline and everything, but none of them at this point are ready for the big stage. That it's like, where does that leave, especially leave Racing Bulls?
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. You can put another driver in the seat. That's fine, but they're not going to have the experience that's really required for a F1 for a Red Bull F1 seat. We've seen several drivers that were very talented didn't last very long at all, less than a season in that seat. So you need somebody
Hmm.
as experienced, very much like Yuki. He's been in that seat for what, 3 or 4 years now. That's what you need in Red Bull. You don't need to bring somebody from F2 or F3. You need somebody that is consistent and you know exactly how he will react.
Yes, he's paid his dues. He has improved
100%.
where the team has told him to improve. Team told him he needed to improve his fitness. What did he do? He takes and gets a new physio and improves his fitness. They tell him that he needs to work on X, Y, and Z in the car. He's done all that. They've asked him to, taper off on the outbursts over the radio when things aren't good. Now we still saw a few outbursts, and I like that fire from Yuki, but he has learned to temper it. We don't see those outbursts, week in and week out like we were at when he first came into Formula One.
Mm-hmm.
So Yuki
Yeah,
has
right.
done everything that has been asked of him. That I think that he is, he really is the one who deserves to have that seat.
100%. I couldn't agree more.
All right. Well, I think we've beaten that dead
Yeah.
that horse to death. All right, so let's get into our season recap. What we're going to do today is we're going to kind of go down through the constructors championship standings. We're going to take and talk about each team, and then we're going to provide a grade for the team and for the drivers themselves. So we're going to start off with our new constructors championship in McLaren. So McLaren, by all accounts, they came out of the gate a little bit slow. They still had a little bit of work to do on the car, but then by Miami, the car just came
Yeah.
alive, and McLaren
Rocket.
never looked back, and they looked strong at every single racetrack that they visited this year, starting, actually before Miami. But then for Miami, where Lando got his first win for the season, they never looked back, and they took lead of the championship at what? When did they take lead in the championship?
It was 4 races ago, I think.
I thought it was more than yeah, it was something like that.
It
So
wasn't that
um,
long, actually.
no, but
It
I
was
mean they
more like
still
5 or 6. We
yeah.
also have to remember that there is a break in there too. So it seems longer
Hmm.
than it was, right?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so with four or five races left in the season, they
A
took the
handful,
lead. I'm sorry.
a handful of races.
Yeah. So with a handful of races left in the season, they took the lead away from Red Bull, and they never looked back. Lando had, finally got his first, win in F1 at Miami through a series of, brilliant, driving and brilliant, pit strategy, and then he went on to win three more races throughout the season. Oscar Piastri also got his first win of the season and tacked on one more win to that. So a total of 6 wins for McLaren for the season. So, by all accounts, a really, really great season for McLaren. And I think it's just their first constructors championship in 26 years, as we talked about, last week when we were recapping Abu Dhabi. So, and I think it really bodes well. I think we're definitely going to see a really strong competition between not, between the top four teams next year. Um, with McLaren, it's going to be, the perennial preseason favorites coming out of the gate.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
All right. So your grades for McLaren as the constructor.
So I would say if we're talking a grading scale, like 1 through 10, 10 being the greatest.
A through B or A through F.
Okay.
Just like if you were in school. So
Okay.
A,
Yeah, I would give them
A
definitely an
plus
A.
through F minus.
I give them an A.
Okay. And for Lando.
Lando, I probably will have some disagreement here, but I would say a B minus for him. And the rationale behind that isn't it's because of how many pole positions he had and how few wins he made out of those pole positions. So to me, he should have been way higher than what he has been. Maybe that's just nerves being that far ahead and his really his first year of winning. So maybe that has something to do with it. But that's that's why I'm not giving him an A or an A plus at this point, just because he did have quite a bit of pole positions and just wasn't able to translate that, even though he had the faster car.
Yep. Okay. Hey, no, I think that's brilliant deduction there. So you're great for Oscar.
Oscar, I would say a B plus. Yeah, maybe an A minus.
Okay.
We're teetering there because he did a
Yeah.
fantastic job. Again, we're looking at a guy that's been in the sport for 2 years. You know,
Yes.
it's amazing to me, and just his poise and how how well he drives, and he just doesn't get disturbed by anything. Even if he's down in the grid, he's still battling it, and he's still not afraid to fight it through. So and he'll go wheel to wheel with Verstappen or anybody else. He's not afraid. So I definitely give him I've just changed my mind. He's definitely an A, not an A minus.
Yeah.
Get him solid into the A's there.
Yeah. So I'm like you. I'm definitely going to give McLaren the A. I'm not, going to give him an A plus only because there was a few. They still had a few issues with, pit strategy and things like that, where there was a couple times where they definitely had, the win, in their sights, and they ended up losing it, based solely on pit strategy. So I'm gonna give them, middle of the road A. Lando, I'm like you. I'm going to give him a B plus though, because it's like when things were right, he did exactly what he needed to do. And 4 wins on a season is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah.
But again, I'm only going to give him a B plus only because, I'm like you. He had a number of other pole positions that he should have been able to convert into wins, and where he struggled a couple times. So that's the only reason why I'm not going to give him an A. But am going to give Oscar also an A, just like you did, because like you said, this has only been his second full season in Formula One, and for him to look that impressive and unflappable is just nothing short of amazing.
Yeah. Wholeheartedly agree.
Yep. All right, so on to our second place team in Ferrari. They had 5 wins for the season. Charles had 3. Carlos had 2. One of them only a week after having his appendix taken out, which was just nothing short of amazing. So
Yeah.
Ferrari they looked unlike McLaren, who came out of the gate a little slow and then came on really strong in the back half of the season after Miami. Ferrari came out of the gate strong, not world class, but they came out of the gate strong. Looked like a solid challenger to Red Bull, but then they just got stronger and stronger as the season went along. And as we've talked about a number of times this year, they made far fewer mistakes. They looked much stronger, and then with what 3 races left to go, they surpassed Red Bull in the championship standing,
Yep.
and they really took the fight to McLaren.
Oh yeah.
When McLaren did kind of have a couple of their little bobbles and looked really good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, for sure. I'll give Ferrari A plus, knowing where they were before and how much fight that they've had to get to where they are now. I mean, all the way through, just always impressive. In fact, we've talked about it so many times on this podcast, how great of a team that they, especially under Fred Vasseur, that he's just so fantastic. It's been great to watch. Definitely
Hmm.
one of the highlights of the season, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're great for Charles.
Yeah, for Leclerc, I would say definitely an A. He had some battles as well, and he always kept it, within legal limits, and he was always very speedy.
Yep. Okay, great. And then you're great for Carlos
Uh,
Sainz.
yeah, I have to go A plus. I mean, class act all the way. He did a phenomenal job all the way through, even knowing that this was his last season at Ferrari. He just never stopped. You know, even at the last race, he was pushing hard to get caught up to Lando. Where again, as his last race, he didn't have to do any of that stuff, but he was more concerned about the Ferrari name than he was about himself. So I definitely class act right there.
Absolutely. So I'm also going to give Ferrari an A for the season because again, they far fewer mistakes, much better, performance all the way across the board. The engineering side was really super strong this year. A lot of the upgrades came, right on time, to keep them, at the top, at the sharp end of the grid.
Yep.
So I'm definitely going to give them an A. I'm going to give Charles, also an A minus because he did have, although he raced hard, like you said, he very few mistakes and everything. He did have a couple of instances where he probably should have looked a little better than what he did.
Mm.
But all in all, he had a really great season. And then, yes, to me, the star of the season, driver of the season is Carlos Sainz because we got the news at very early on, before the first race of the season, we got the news that Lewis Hamilton is leaving Mercedes, moving on to Ferrari for next season, and that Carlos Sainz would be out. And then Carlos Sainz had some, back and forth trying to figure out, where he was going to go. He initially, there was talk that he was going to go to Mercedes and then he got snubbed. And now that there's rumors that he might still go to Mercedes, but he saw what, great things in Williams, and he made that, signed with Williams, for next season. But at the same time, he still continued to fight hard. And
Yeah.
he said, early on, he said, I am going to fight for Ferrari until the very last lap of the very last race. And that is exactly what
Oh
he did is
yeah.
he fought and fought and fought. There were times where where things happened over the course of a race weekend where he probably could have just said, okay, I'm just going to kind of go out there and just kind of half-ass it and everything because I got nothing to fight for because I've already got my seat at Williams is secured next season. I'm already
Yep.
out the door. They didn't think enough to keep me. So he could have done that, but he didn't. He continued to fight. So for he gets my A plus plus plus.
Yeah,
All
I
right, so
I
this
agree. I've been a fan of his for a while, and I really just think the world of him. So really, I completely agree with that.
Yep, absolutely. So on to our third place finisher in Red Bull, who started out the season. And at first, when they first started out the season, they won the first, I think, four of the first five races on the season. They looked, just like they were gonna, after their all-conquering dominant performance of 2023, everybody was groaning saying, "Oh God, we're just gonna have another repeat of last year,
Yeah.
where 2024 is going to be just, it's going to be 2023 version two."
Yeah.
And then things kind of went sideways. They've lost, Adrian Newey. That was announced, fairly early on in the season that he was going to be stepping back, and stepping in and leaving Red Bull at the beginning of 2025, before the season starts. And you kind of saw, like we talked about, earlier when we were talking about Checo's exit from um, Red Bull, we now see, we saw that drop off in their performance, which then took and allowed McLaren as they continued to improve their performance and Ferrari as they continued their steady march. We saw Red Bull lose out on the Constructors' Championship. And, until the very late season upgrades at Brazil, we even saw Max, who won, so many races last season.
Yeah.
Even he looked kind of mediocre at best.
Yep.
Therefore,
At
the
best, you're
span
right.
of what, 8 or 9 races.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It was dramatic. Ever since Newey left, I think that was they depended on him a lot more than what they were wanting to admit to.
Yes, absolutely. But and it took them a little while for the for the team to kind of right the ship. and I still don't think that I still don't think going into 2025, I still don't think they're going to be, anywhere near the world beater that they were beforehand, because I definitely think, they're not going to be the top team coming out of the gate in 2025.
Right.
All right, so your grade for Red Bull.
Red Bull, I'm going to be a little bit harsh, but I'm going to go full C on them.
Oh
Uh,
wow, that's
yeah,
really
yeah,
harsh.
yeah. Well, the thing is, in my mind, uh, there's no way Newey leaving was like a surprise to them. This wasn't like a Lewis Hamilton. Uh, that's to me, you should have had a second in command very, very soon, and for them to take that long, that many races, I think it was like 9 racers or so before they
Mm-hmm.
actually got the car to be somewhat manageable. It took them a long time to get those upgrades going. So, with that in mind, I don't see how, at least in my mind, I have a lot of negative um, thoughts about that because as a team you should be prepared in those types of situations.
Okay. No, I mean, excellent points all the way around. So you're great on Max.
And Max A+, dude. I just
Yeah.
think he did. Even drivers that complain that he wasn't driving nice and all that stuff. Even with all that, I still firmly believe that he's an A+ driver, and probably for many many more seasons to come. But definitely this season, he definitely deserves an A+.
Yep. Absolutely. And okay. And then I'll get into my thoughts here in just a minute. So and then your grade on Checo.
We got to go F, bud. Yeah, he's yeah. With that much of disparity between points, I mean, if it was a little bit closer, maybe 150 points gaps or something to that effect. But I mean, come on, there's just no
Yeah.
way. No, yeah. Unfortunately, that's I have to go to that aspect just because he just wasn't there. And I said that a couple times throughout the season.
Mm-hmm.
He's a non-factor.
Yep. Absolutely. So, on the strength of 9 wins, all of them by Max this season.
Yep.
So I'm gonna not be quite as harsh as you are, simply because Red Bull still, they did seem to take and kind of, they had that period where they seem to be floundering a little bit, but based upon the strength of the car at the beginning of the season and the strength of the car at the end of the season, I'm going to give Red Bull a solid, B plus, just simply because they were able to right the ship, and for their overall season performance, to come in third, uh, and still, not fall further back, especially with Checo's, woeful performance and not, getting more points for the team, for them to still finish third. I'm going to give them a solid B plus. Now, like you, because he won his fourth world championship, based upon, he got out to an early, lead on the season. So I'm definitely giving Max his A plus that he richly deserves. I don't think that you can give a sitting world champion anything less than an A plus,
Yeah, true.
especially having won 4 in a row now.
Right. Yeah, in a row. You're absolutely right.
And then for Checo, I'm going to be a little more generous, and I'm going to give him a D for the season, only because of his early season performance pre-Miami. But then, if we had stopped and looked at the grading at the end, by Miami, I would have had him definitely in, the B plus category, maybe A minus category, just simply because of
Mhm.
his performance in Japan. But then the last 18 races of the season, which is over 2/3 of the season, and to look that awful, I got to go with a D.
Yeah,
So absolutely.
wholeheartedly. Yeah.
Yeah. So then on to Mercedes, who, had previously had been so, before the 2022 rule changes, had been so dominant, had won, the constructors championship like 9 years in a row. They had won 8 of the last 9 drivers championships. They just were all conquering and everything. But they again started out the season very, you know, slow. The car still was not where they needed it to be. They finally, they had gone in completely the wrong direction on the car's development, and it took them a long time to really get that battleship turned around. And then on top of that, before the first race of the season, we got the news of Lewis Hamilton, who had already signed a 2-year contract extension with Mercedes,
Yeah.
suddenly did a complete about face and decided to leave Mercedes to go to Ferrari for the next 2 years. But again, much like Carlos Sainz did at Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton still, even with, some poor performances, both by himself and the team, managed to still fight very hard. Mercedes still wound up with 4 wins on the season, which, after going winless last season, was, or only, no, they only had one win last season. It was a very impressive performance from them.
Yeah.
But so Lewis had 2 wins. One was gifted to him by Georgia's disqualification at Spa, but still a really good year, by all accounts for Mercedes compared to last season. So your thoughts and your grade on Mercedes as a team.
Yeah, so my grade on Mercedes, I'm going to go a little bit probably higher than uh, I don't know, probably higher than I should, but with all the troubles that they've faced and how fast that they were able to turn around this season. Last season a bit different, but I'll go with a solid B plus for their performances this season. Yeah, I think they did a really really good job. Their engineers, performance analysts, all of them combined, and obviously the drivers as well did a fantastic job this year.
All right. And then your grade on Lewis for the season.
For the season, I will go an A. He did. I think he drove really really well. He did a lot of belly aching, which it seems to be his hallmark. But
Yes.
he did drive very well when the conditions and everything were suited to him. But yeah, he did. I think he did pretty well.
Yep. And your grade for George for the season.
George, I'll say a B plus. Yeah, I think he did really well. Just edging out on an A, but yeah, I'd say B plus for him.
All right, very cool. So for myself, for Mercedes, I'm like you. I'm gonna go, I think you said B plus for the
Yeah,
season. I'm gonna agree with you. I think that they did a very good job of going from, a really less than stellar car to fighting and being extremely fast towards the end of the season. So, riding that ship, I definitely agree with you on the B plus. Maybe just almost just missed out on an A minus there. Now Lewis, I'm like you. There were times where the car was not great and he was not happy. But for him, like I said, he got 2 wins on the season. One of them was his record-breaking ninth, or was it eighth or ninth, win at Silverstone for the British Grand Prix, which is
yeah, that was awesome.
unprecedented,
Yeah,
which was just an awesome sight to see, especially knowing that he was leaving Mercedes at the end of the season. For to see him, win on home soil one last time for Mercedes was just nothing short of amazing.
yeah,
So I'm going with, a definite, with giving Lewis an A. And then for George, I'm also going to give him an A, just simply because knowing that next year he is going to be, quote unquote, the man at Mercedes, the fact that he stepped up his game and he was consistently out qualifying and out racing Lewis for the season. I think he definitely deserves an A for his performance.
yeah. Awesome.
All right, so let's jump into Aston Martin real quick. So, who was kind of, the best of, the top of the midfield by a considerable margin. They looked, but by all accounts, it was, definitely a step back from last season. They didn't have any podiums at all this season. There were times where they looked, mediocre at best.
Yeah,
They had a couple weekends that were just complete disasters for them. So I don't think that there's a lot we can unpack there other than they just had
yeah,
a very they had by comparison to last year, they had a very poor season, and it almost seems like they're just kind of, have, now taking kind of the we're waiting for Adrian and some of the other technical people who are
Yeah.
coming over to Aston, and we're waiting for the new wind tunnel now, and all these other infrastructure things that Lawrence Stroll has put into place to maybe kind of, I think that they kind of, gave up on the car late in the season, and they were
Yeah.
aimed more towards next season.
Right. Yeah. For me, I would have to go with a C or a C minus for Aston this year.
Yep. And then your grade on Fernando Alonso.
Unfortunately, he was hampered by the car, so his drive ability was very much impacted because of that. But I'm a Fernando fan anyway, so I'll definitely give him an A minus,
Oh,
just
wow. All
mostly because
right.
I'm a fan.
Okay. Gotcha. And then for Lance Stroll.
Yeah. So Lance, oh, poor Lance. Sometimes it's funny throughout the season. Sometimes he had these, really brilliant drives for him, and then at other times it was just like, what are you doing, man? What's going on? So I would give him a B minus, edging on a C.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm like you. I definitely think that Aston, especially when you look at, where they were at last season, I'm definitely going to say that Aston Martin, I'm going to put them at, probably at about a C, especially, I would have put them at, a C, at a B minus B last year because of their,
Mhm.
they had, early part of the season, they were consistently, Fernando was consistently on the podium. So for that reason, I am going with a C. Now I would consider myself somewhat, no, I'm nowhere near as much of a fan of Fernando as you are. So I'm only going to give Fernando a C for the year, only
Wow,
because
yeah.
even though the car was not as good, I also didn't think that he was fighting quite as hard.
Hmm.
There were times last year where he, was doing things with that Aston Martin that was way above what the Aston Martin was capable of. And I kind of
Right.
saw that Alonso kind of maybe took a little, like the car, as the car took a step back, so did Alonso.
Hmm.
And then for Stroll, I'm like you. We've talked about it a number of times this
Yeah.
season, over the course of the season about, how at times he looks really good and at other times he looks, like I don't know, like the guy, like a lot of people accuse him of as being the only reason why he's in Formula One is because of daddy's money. Um, so I'm gonna go with a D for
Yeah.
Stroll just simply because of his inconsistencies. And I
Gotcha.
think that as soon as he, figures some things out and becomes more consistent, I think that he'll be a much better driver.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, right now you're right.
Okay.
He's very inconsistent. So I can definitely see your grade there.
Yep. All right. So for Alpine, that like we talked about earlier, they started out with a
Horrible.
absolutely dreadful car, but it wasn't until the after the summer break and towards the last quarter part of the season that we saw Alpine really turn the ship around
Yeah,
and become a completely different looking team than from what they looked like at the beginning of the season.
very true. Yeah,
And we
Alpine.
had the
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and then we had the absolutely brilliant drive by Ocon and by Gasly
Hmm.
at Brazil
Yep,
to bring it home and in second and third place, for the first podiums of for the first podiums of the season. So it was just nothing short of inspired racing by Alpine in the last quarter part of the season.
yeah, wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, I mean, how they ended up definitely doesn't tell the whole story, but man, how fast they came back was just simply amazing. So
Hmm.
I would give them an A minus, just because of the struggles that they had in the earlier season. I would otherwise give them an A plus, but man, they just did a fantastic job. And then Gasly, man, Gasly really, really impresses me. I would give him an A. And then Ocon, he had some really good drives, and then he had some just horrendous drives as well, especially the ones that got him basically fired from Alpine. So I'll give him a B plus because he is a talented driver, no
Okay.
doubt. But some of those issues that he needs to rectify his anger from his own teammate, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm not going to disagree with you, and that's you've hit exactly the grades that I was going to give Alpine. So we'll just go ahead and move on to Haas.
Okay.
So Haas was another team that, at times, they looked much better than they have the last couple seasons. We had Hulkenberg was actually, qualifying really well. He was also, consistently scoring points. K-Mag had, some struggles, at times, but at other times, K-Mag looked really well. And on a whole, the team seemed to really, the car still wasn't, fantastic this year, but it was definitely much better, and it definitely
Yeah.
improved over the course of the season. So I think Haas had, I mean, by all accounts, had a pretty decent season. They were definitely, they were leading Alpine. They were right behind Aston Martin for a good chunk of the season. And it wasn't only until the very end of the season that Alpine was able to surpass Haas in the constructors championship anyway.
Yeah.
So I think Haas had by all accounts, had a much better year. And I think that, with the addition of the quote unquote super sub in Ollie Bierman as their,
Yeah.
one of their drivers next year, and, with Ocon, if he can, take and minimize some of the mistakes that he made this last season at Alpine, if he can take that into the season next year at Alpine, I think Alpine's or Haas is going to have a really solid year.
Yeah.
So your thoughts
Wholeheartedly.
and your
Yeah.
thoughts and your grades.
Yeah, we've said this many times on the podcast, but they were our dark horse or our surprise, and then they ended up not being our surprise anymore because they were doing it so consistently. So definitely a
Hmm.
plus for the team itself, for Haas. Really happy to see that team doing so well. And then for Hulkenberg, I think he's a phenomenal driver, so I'll give him an A. And then K Mag, K Mag had he had a few issues here or there. He remains to be one of my favorites, though. The Viking of F1. I my heart bleeds that he's not going to be in F1 anymore. But he does have a drive on another series, so at least he's still employed as a racing driver. But for him, I'll give him an A.
All right. Cool. Well, okay. So for the year, I'm going to give Haas a B only because
Yeah,
I think that they missed a few opportunities, and the team itself had, a few mistakes, throughout the season that probably were avoidable mistakes that I think kind of hampered them, at times, and that they should have had some better results had it not been for the mistakes from the team, for so I'm going to go with a B plus for Haas for the team itself. For Hulkenberg, I'm going to definitely give him an A for the season because he did
yeah,
things with that car that were just nothing short of amazing. And the fact that not only did he do amazing things with the car, but he did it on a very consistent basis. I mean, at the end of the season, he was a perennial, threat to make it into Q3 every single, race. They looked really good, he looked really good throughout the season. So yeah, I'm definitely
yeah.
going to go, definitely going to go A for, Hulkenberg. And for K-Mag, like I said, he didn't seem to have quite the consistency and stuff. So I'm going to give him a B minus for the season.
That's fair. Again, he
Yeah.
had some inconsistent races, and he did some very odd things. So I definitely see your point there.
Yep. All right. So on to Racing Bulls.
So Racing Bulls, they're an odd one. I would give the team itself probably a B minus, edging on a C plus. They, in my opinion, I think they could have done a little bit better from a performance standpoint, from the car design. But with that being said, I definitely think a B minus, maybe a C, just depending. Yuki, I mean, Yuki was phenomenal for the last few years. He's been fantastic. So I'll give him an A. Lawson, well, I guess should we rate Ricardo since he's no longer in F1 or
I was going to say let's just rate them both, lump them together. So
yeah.
Yuki's, we'll just lump it together for Yuki's teammates as a whole.
Yeah, it's funny we talked about this too, but Lawson pretty much placed almost exactly where Ricardo was placing. So
Mm-hmm.
my belly aching as much as I did about Ricardo was largely unfounded because we have another driver is having the same type of places that we see on at the end of the races. So I'll give them a combined C plus.
All right. Well, you're a lot more generous there on that one, but so we'll get, real quick. I am in total agreement with you that I think that Racing Bull, the car never really, it had some potential there, but the team just wasn't quite able to make up the ground. At times they showed, at times, they bring upgrades and they looked really solid for, a race, and then the next race they were maybe a little off the pace. It just seemed like to me that the pace of development on the car didn't seem to be as strong. So I'm gonna go C plus with them for
Yeah.
the car, for the team itself. For Yuki, I'm definitely going to go a solid B plus because as we've talked about it quite a bit, and I think it's pretty clear my feelings about Yuki and what a dramatic improvement he's made, and the argument to be made for him to get a much higher tier drive than what he's had at Racing Bulls. So I'm definitely going a B plus there. And then his teammates, I'm going to go, C, because like I said, Yuki continuously outshone both Ricardo and Lawson throughout the season, both in the racing and in qualifying. Whether it be sprint or Grand Prix, he just seemed to have the measurement of any teammate that he had this year. So I'm just going to lump them together and go with a C for the
Yeah.
season.
Yeah. That's fair, I think. Yeah.
Okay, Williams. So Williams had a really, especially the back half of the season. I guess the thing that you can say to sum up Williams' season is crash, crash, crash. Um,
Yeah.
it seemed to be that almost every weekend, at least one, if not both of the drivers were crashing, or causing some kind of damage to the car, so the mechanics were spending a lot more time repairing cars than they were actually developing or making the cars as solid as they could for a race. So take it what you will. So your thoughts on Williams and your grades?
Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping that next season that they get their act together. This season, you're right. I mean, it was a mismanagement from a driver's perspective because even Albon was crashing with some regularity. Um, so I definitely see that the team itself. I mean, I would say probably a C minus. Uh, they have a lot of improvement internally to do for next season.
Okay, and then your grade for Albon?
Albon, I would say, uh, yeah, I mean, with as many wrecks as he did have, I would say probably a C or a C plus for Alex.
Okay. And
Yeah,
then unlike Racing Bulls, we can't really lump
yeah,
the teammates because it was really a marked difference between Sargent and Calapinto. So, Sargent, he ends up getting replaced mid-season, much like Ricardo did. He had no points for the season, so we're just going to give him an F and move. Both of us, I think, we'll just give him an F and move on and wish him nothing but the best in IndyCar. And then
yes.
you're great for Calapinto.
Calapinto he had a lot of wrecks, and I understand it's his rookie season, but oh my gosh, it was a disaster zone. So you know, understanding that he had it was his rookie season and he's trying to impress. I'll be generous, I think, and give him a C plus.
Oh wow, that's really generous.
Yeah, it's very generous. Again, just knowing that rookie season, he came in mid season as well, so cold, giving him a little bit of allowance there. Otherwise, it would be like a D.
Okay, well, like you, I well, for Williams as a whole, I'm going to give them a C plus only because the mechanics and the engineers worked their butts off in repairing the cars and being able to, keep the team running, despite all of their challenges. Because you have to remember that Albon crashed the car so badly in Australia very on early in the season that they weren't even able to repair the car and they didn't have enough backup parts to be able to rebuild the car.
Yeah.
And so they
Oh
ended
my
up putting
gosh.
Albon into Sargent's car, and
Yep.
Sargent ended up having to sit out at Australia.
Yep.
So that puts a big ding on the team itself. And then all of the crashes throughout the season and them having to rebuild the cars, despite, all of those challenges, they for what they were able to do with the limited resources that they had, I think a C plus is definitely warranted. For Albon, I'm actually going to only give him a C only because he this season, unlike last season where he was consistent, much more consistent. This season, he seemed to be crashing much more
Yeah.
consistently. Whether it
Yep.
be early in the season, like the crash that he had you know, um, at Australia, all the way through his crash at Mexico, when he collided with Bierman during practice, which was really unwarranted. That was a really, a big boneheaded move by him, and then he crashed so heavily, I think it was at Brazil, that he wasn't even actually able to take part in the race for that one. And
Hmm.
and kudos to Williams, for not, giving over the car, his teammate's car to him again, because it was like, this is the second time you crashed a car so bad that we couldn't even repair it. The second time, that's on you, buddy.
Yeah.
And then,
Exactly.
yeah. And then for Calapinto, I'm going to give him a C as well, only because, like you said, he did crash a lot, in the couple of races, coming in, partway through, in the last quarter of the season, replacing Logan Sargent. But the one thing that he was able to do is he was able to score points in his, more points in his first race at Williams than what Sargent was in the entire first three quarters of the season. So,
Yeah.
so for that, I'm going to, give him a C as well. And then for Sauber was just god awful this season. We've all, acknowledged it, whether it be, the awful pit stops at the beginning of the season, where they had 20 and 30-second pit stops. It was the car itself was just absolutely dreadful. And, oftentimes, was struggling just to make, the race itself. You had, you know, two drivers who were, very, very inconsistent and, and
Yeah.
were really hamstrung by the cars themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in here with my grades first this time. And I'm just going to go F for the team itself because the car was so dreadful and they did not seem to be working on trying to develop the car at all. Um, I'm going to go F for Botas. As much as I love Botas, the fact that he just didn't seem to be, really, I don't know. It seemed just from my personal opinion, I thought that even as bad as the car was, I would have thought that he would have performed better.
Hmm.
So I thought his performance was very poor for the season. And I'm going to give Joe Granu a D minus only because he scored the only points that Sauber had all season long.
Yeah.
So and he did have, and plus, he got to, drive in front of his home crowd, which did seem to help his performance a little bit, in being a Chinese driver, getting to drive in China. So I'm going to give him a D minus for the season, but only on the basis of the emotional story there. So your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, for um the team, I would say an F. There's just no way around that. And for Botas, I'm gonna be a little bit more generous just because I do think a lot of that had to do with the car itself. So I'll say a C. And Joe, I'd probably say a C minus for him.
All right, so that is our season recap, and we will come back in a couple weeks when we start season three. We'll break down and preview the upcoming season, and we'll kind of take and based upon where our grades sit. Will they influence it? Will other things influence our uh our opinions on the coming season or whatever? So that's what we have for our season recap. So tell us what you think. If you think, hey, you guys are really stupid, you guys were way too generous on this team, or you guys were way too harsh on this team, let us know down in the comments. We would love to hear your thoughts on any of the teams or any of the drivers and their place in the season standings and their final grades. All right. So last thing we're going to finish up and have a little fun here. We've got all of our serious business out of the way. So we're going to take and do our Stump the Pundit section. So this is a section that, as everybody who has been listening to the show for any period of time knows, that this is my favorite section of the show that we do every week, in the fact that Corey, who is somewhat of a newer fan of F1, will take and try to stump me with trivia questions about the history of the sport in or the history of Formula One. So, Corey, what do you have for me this week?
So with Sergio leaving, and both you and I are Checo fans, just not very happy with his performance this year, but overall very happy with Sergio as a driver. So thought, why not? Let's finish up the season with one with Sergio.
Okay.
So just a few questions here. What year did Perez make his debut in Formula One? And which team?
Let's see. I don't remember what team he started with, but I want to say it was 2018.
2011, and it was with
Oh, wow.
Sauber. Sauber was the
Wow.
team with, yeah.
I cannot believe man, it does not feel like it's been that long, that he's been in the sport that long.
Yeah, it's been here for a
Wow.
while.
Okay, that is really bad on me. Boy, that makes me look like. All right, next one.
All right. Which race did Perez first win?
And
what year?
First race was 2018?
2020, very close.
Okay. So, and it was for Racing Point, and it was
the Sakir Grand Prix.
Yeah, at Russia.
His tenure at Red Bull, how many wins has he had?
He has had 5.
Yep. So he's had a total of 6 wins in total. 5 of those have come from Red Bull.
Okay.
That's it for this year in Stump the Pundit.
All right. Awesome. Love it, love it, love it. All right. So shall we call it a day?
Think so.
And we'll call it a season as well. So the sun is set on the 2024 season, and Corey and I are packing it in. We will return in 2 weeks with an all-new episode to start getting you ready for the 2025 season. So until next time, Speed Freaks, best wishes for the new year. He's Corey. I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.